Power coming back online for many in Texas after that winter storm that swept the south, but millions have been ordered to boil tap water before drinking it. Our next guest is both a Texas resident and an energy expert. Allison Silverstein is an independent energy consultant and former strategic advisor to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She joins us to talk about what went wrong with Texas power systems, how to fix them. You're in Austin, and you lucked out, Allison, because you were on the same power line as a hospital. So you've got like 12 people living in a house with you right now, and animals.
Pretty close. The animals feel like a couple people apiece. So yes, it's been crowded.
I know how that works. Allison, we want to try to figure out what went wrong. And actually, you wrote a long piece back in, I think, May of 2020 about ERCOT and whether it could handle what was coming up. And I think at that time they were most worried about, or people were worried about, heat and air conditioning issues. It wasn't necessarily looking at it from this side of things. But where was the weak link in the whole chain, in your view?
Well, I think there is a lot more data than analysis that needs to be collected and worked through. But based on preliminary examination, it looks to me as though there were 5 major causes of this particular blackout event. One of them was, of course, that this was an unprecedented storm in terms of cold, long duration, really high moisture, and that knocked out eventually 40,000 megawatts of Texas electric generation capacity. It took out over 40% of Texas's thermal generation fleet alone, 40%, and that's of natural gas, coal, and nuclear generation. And when the grid operators started losing that amount of generation, they had no choice but to cut load to keep the entire grid the remainder of the grid afloat and avoid a really catastrophic situation. There was all of this happened because of insufficient power plant winterization. This was a guideline; it wasn't mandatory. There was a huge chunk of the natural gas supply for Texas power plants that froze up, both at the wellhead level at production and in pipelines. So gas plants couldn't get the fuel that they needed to run. ERCOT under forecast customer demand by 20%, which means that they didn't have enough generation ready to serve customer demand that kept rising as the night got colder and colder. And last, ERCOT's a standalone grid, so they were unable to alleviate these shortages by importing electricity from outside from the rest of Texas. And that's a wonderful idea if you like avoiding federal regulation, but it's a terrible idea if you like protecting reliability against disasters like this.
Yeah, that last point, we should talk about some more. So the rationale was to avoid regulation, hence they'd probably call it deregulation, but it leaves you in the position of being stuck with what you have and not being able to ask for help when you need it.
Correct. And I have been both a Texas state regulator and a federal regulator. And I can tell you that the fun of being a Texas regulator is that you are in your own small patch, the king, but it means you've got nowhere to go for help. And there are at least 4.5 million Texans who've been sitting in the dark and the cold for several days who are not particularly happy with the outcomes of Texas regulation at this time and don't know the difference between state and federal regulation other than that they're not real happy with what they've got. And add to that the 20 million Texans or more who are going to have to be boiling water or don't have any water to boil at all or any clean water. And it's pretty clear that what we have done overall is not what people are super happy with. But let's be clear, regulation was only one of many issues that caused this situation. It wasn't, you can't just say Texas regulatory status and Texas's standalone market. The way we set things up from an institutional construct didn't work. You can say all regulators should have done things like make effective winterization for winter cold and long summer heat waves mandatory. Weatherization is the kind of reliability thing that we should have been doing at every level as a mandatory measure, not as a best practice.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.